Welcome to The Smart Divorce on Divorce Source Radio, helping you move forward with focus, hope, and confidence, saving you time, money, and your sanity as you build a better life post-divorce. I'm Steve Peck. Deborah Moskovich, divorce consultant, educator, and author of The Smart Divorce, brings you the leading experts and researchers in the divorce arena. We'll also be speaking with those in the trenches, people who've learned from their divorce and how their experience has changed their lives. And they would tell you for the better. Deborah's learned that divorce can be a beginning, even if it looks like an end. Divorce can be rich in opportunity to learn and grow from. And we're going to explore how to take this information and create a positive post-divorce life. And now, here's Deborah.
Hi, Steve. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Deborah?
Very well, thanks. We've got a fabulous show today. We've got a wonderful psychologist, Dr. Stahl, who's a practitioner, author, and teacher specializing in high-conflict families of divorce. He's the author of Parenting After Divorce and Custody Evaluation and a Custody Evaluation book. You know, so many parents are concerned about what it means about time sharing, what happens when there are mobility issues. And there are fears around what's the right parenting plan. Is there such a thing as the right parenting plan? And I'm thrilled to have Dr. Stahl on our show today to tell us what the answers are. You know, Dr. Stahl, I really admire your honesty in your bio, and you talked about how you've made mistakes as well as a single parent. Can you tell us, what some of those mistakes are and how you go about repairing mistakes? Because really, the truth of the matter is nobody's perfect.
You're exactly right, Debbie. And, I think that the reality is that all parents strive to do well by their children. I think we love our children. We want to do well. We want to do the best we can. Even parents who are engaged in high conflict situations often want to do better than they are doing. For myself, sometimes the communication with my ex-wife was not as good as I might have liked. There were rare but occasional times that we would argue about holidays and travel that we might want to do with my daughter. But even within that, I could always try to recognize my role in those problems as opposed to worrying as much about what my ex-wife was doing during the time that we were engaged in conflict. And I think that for me, that's probably the biggest mistake parents make. And when that happened to me, when I was more focused on her behavior, that was the biggest mistake I made, because I think that it's always more important to take responsibility for our own actions and try to just be the best parent and best co-parent we can be. Now, not everybody can co-parent, and we can talk about that today, but by and large, that's the goal, is for everyone to do the best job of parenting and co-parenting that they can do, and not worry so much about what the other parent is doing.
That's absolutely the truth. You can be responsible for yourself, but you can't be responsible for someone else. I've made mistakes with my kids. And
you have? Not Deborah.
As hard as I try to be perfect. But, the truth is, I'll say to my kids, I screwed up. And I apologize. I apologize profusely. Dr. Stahl, do you recommend apologizing to your kids?
Of course. I think that one of the realities is that children learn by example. And because children learn by example, part of the example we share for them is that when we make mistakes, we own them.
Yeah.
We're not, as you said, nobody's perfect. We're all going to engage in behaviors that we're not happy with. Our children engage in behaviors that they're not happy with and we're not happy with as parents. The best example we can give to children is to apologize, to explain what we did and why we made the mistake we made, and to encourage ourselves to stop and think before we make those mistakes, and encourage our children to stop and think before they make mistakes again. And I think it's a wonderful example to set for children when we do that.
Yeah, because nobody's perfect, as you say. Tell me more about the parenting plan, because I think that is a huge concern of so many parents. There is no right parenting plan, from what I understand. But are there better plans?
There are better plans, but what's a better plan for your family may not be the better plan for my family, and it may not be the better plan for a family down the street. The reality is that there is absolutely no right parenting plan, but there are a myriad of parenting plans available, and they're as unique and individual to each family. There are certain optimal situations that we recognize that children benefit from, and I'm basing this on all the research we have in divorce and separated parents. Among those is when it's feasible, and I'll explain when it's not in a moment, when it's feasible, both parents are actively involved in a wide range of the child's life experiences and activities. That doesn't mean that it has to be a 50-50 plan, though for many families a 50-50 type plan will be ideal. It does mean that both parents spend significant amounts of time with their children across a dimension of the child's life experiences and activities. So, for example, if you have a very, very young child, both parents are involved in feeding, nurturing, toilet training for the toddlers, overnights with sleeping, those kinds of things. Children benefit from both parents being involved, but on a schedule and a routine that is predictable and easily understood, not by language from the very young child, but from the routines of the very young child. As the child gets older and gets into school age and has extracurricular activities, ideally both parents are involved with teachers, both parents are involved with those activities. That doesn't mean that it has to be rigid, and one parent may have one activity that she does with their children, and the other parent may have other activities that he does with the children. As long as there's no conflict about that, that's ideal. Mm-hmm. So again, both parents being involved in a range of experiences and activities of the child, both parents helping with homework, both parents engaged with their child and their friends, all of those kinds of things. We want to avoid the Disneyland dad phenomenon where a parent only does the playthings and the other parent only does the work things. Excuse me. The third component of that is that it should allow a child's life to be seamless. So it doesn't matter whether the child's in mom's home or dad's home. The child's life moves along in a healthy, fundamental way that the same friends in both houses, the same activities in both houses, where the child's place in each home doesn't affect how the child lives his or her life. Doesn't mean there aren't differences between parenting styles and some rules and structures at each home, but they should be at least relatively close so that the child's life is seamless. Okay. Now, I started this by saying, I'll tell you where it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Okay? And there are really three examples where that doesn't work. Example number one is when you've got long distance between parents. You cannot break the baby in half and have a child spend 1 month with one parent, 1 month with the other parent when it's a 1-year-old. That doesn't work with attachment. Children need to be able to form attachments and make those attachments secure in a way that is healthy for that child. That doesn't happen bouncing back and forth from one location to another long distance. Same with school. I got a question from an attorney the other day that they were wondering for a 6-year-old about putting the child at home schooling so that the child could spend a month at dad's house and a month at mom's house, about a 3-hour drive apart. And I said, one level, that's fine. Both parents are actively involved. But look at the risks. This child has to have 2 sets of friends that they're constantly getting connected with and then leaving every 30 days. They won't have extracurricular activities. They won't have the benefits of a school education as opposed to homeschooling. I recognize that there are some children that benefit from homeschooling, but there are benefits to the actual being in a school situation. And this child is constantly moving back and forth on a schedule that meets their parental desire for equal time rather than allowing this child to have a seamless life in both homes. So long-distance situations really do require one parent generally being the primary parent, if you will, I hate that language, but sometimes we use it. And one parent being the secondary or distant parent. And we try to replicate as much as we can, being as active as we can with the child during the time we're in their care. They're in our care. One other thing I always encourage in those situations for the distant parent to spend some time with the child in the child's environment with the primary parent, so that that parent can be involved in the extracurricular activities, schooling, etc. The other time this doesn't work, quite frankly, with sharing parenting in some fashion. And by the way, one of the lead researchers in our country for years, although he's now back in England, his name is Michael Lamb, he used to say that as long as a parent spends about 35% of the time with their children distributed well, that's going to be the optimal, minimal amount of time if we've got the arrangement we're talking about. But again, that won't work if you've got abusive parents, if you've got domestic violence, if you've got toxic parents because of severe emotional problems, if you've got substance abuse problems, if one parent but not the other has significant personality disorders, and there you're talking maybe 10 to 15 to 20% of the population.
Yeah.
Well,
that's a big percentage of the population.
It is a big percentage of the population, but surprise, guess what? That's also the percentage of high conflict folks we see, 10 to 15 to 20%. And there's a lot of overlap between the two. So for many of our high conflict families, when courts are fashioning the parenting plan as opposed to when parents are, because they just can't do it on their own, some kind of shared parenting, some kind of equal parenting may not make sense. Now, I want to put in a plug for a document that I was very fortunate to be actively involved in. It's called Planning for Parenting Time, Arizona's Guide for Parents Living Apart. And any listener who wants to can just Google Arizona's Parenting Time Guide or something like that, or the title I just read. Again, it's Planning for Parenting Time, Arizona's Guide for Living Apart. That document lists about, I think it's like 20 different potential parenting plans. It's done developmentally, so for different plans for younger children, different plans for school-age children, different plans for teenagers. And it identifies the risks and benefits and the kinds of parents that will optimally choose certain kinds of parenting plans based on their circumstances. And I take pride in the fact that I was fortunate enough to be one of the people who helped write this document. But I find it to be the most useful way to encourage both parents. It's designed for parents, not judges, but also judges to widen their thinking about different kinds of parenting plans. And then, secondly, you mentioned my book, Parenting After Divorce. You know, I've got 2 chapters that really identify issues around this. One is about the need for a parenting plan that's structured and consistent. Doesn't have to be rigid except for the high conflict folks, but structured and consistent so kids know what to expect, so that children's lives are secure and predictable. And then another chapter, and it also helps with parents learning how to communicate, because it's in the parenting plan about a variety of different things. The second chapter really focuses on the fact that parenting isn't a percentage. That's the chapter title. And what we try to do in there is I try to emphasize that no matter how much time you have with your child, when you're with your child, you want to do the best job you can possibly do.
Now, I love the title of that.
Actively involved as you can. So I know that was a long run-on paragraph, if you will, but thank you for letting me explain that myself. But
that was excellent information. And as a matter of fact, we'll have a link to that Arizona link that you mentioned on our site. So
Planning
that
for Parenting Time, Arizona's Guide for Parents Living Apart. And by the way, anybody in the world can use that document, and I've been teaching that document around the world.
I just looked it up. It's great. It's a PDF file.
Yes, it is a PDF file. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great.
So, Dr. Stahl, you talk about parenting is not, your child is not a percentage. And I think that parents need to understand that you can't measure your time in terms of minutes and hours, but the quality of time. Now, Steve and I have talked to lots of people and about parenting plans and parents about their time with their kids. Kids are the ones that live out divorce. We all know that. When my children go with their dad, then I get I get the weekend off. I get to do with it whatever I want. But my kids are the ones that they're packing up their bags. They're the ones that are, always going back and forth. Or, and my kids go with their dad every other weekend and once during the week. And then I've spoken to other people whose kids go with the other parent, with the co-parent every other week. So your kids are always packing up their bags and, and especially as the kids get older, they've got so much to take with them. They've got all their books to take with them. And then, girls have their makeup and, whatever. What can you suggest to make it that much easier? Because as parents, we get to stay home all the time. Kids are going back and forth between mom's house and dad's house.
You're absolutely right. And again, I think the children didn't request their parents to get divorced.
Yeah.
We as parents need to recognize we have a fundamental responsibility not only to do the best job of parenting we can, but when we've made a decision to get divorced, we have a fundamental job of making our children's lives a little bit easier. Now, in some communities, it's even easier than others. For example, when my daughter was going back and forth between her mom's house and mine on what's called a 2-2-5-5 schedule. So she was with me every Monday and Tuesday, and she was with her mom every Wednesday and Thursday, overnights, and then we alternated weekends. That's the 2-2-5-5. It's actually a wonderful plan for the right families and the right children. My daughter got used to it very easily. She always knew where she was, and her friends always knew where she was. And her mom and I lived about 3 miles apart, so that made it very easy for all of us. The key was she had 2 sets of school books. So the school helped with that by providing her mom with 1 set of books and me with 1 set of books, so that was easy. She had 2 bicycles. She had, soccer equipment because she played soccer at the time, and baseball glove because she also played boys baseball at the time, that went back and forth between 2 homes. But if it was inadvertently at the wrong home, her mom and I didn't argue about who was going to transport it to the other parent's home. It was simple. It was seamless for her. You asked what did we do wrong? Communication sometimes and arguing about holidays sometimes was wrong. I can talk about what we did right. We never argued about where her things were, and we always made sure that if a school assignment was at the wrong house, somebody would make it get to the other house. And we never argued about the parent going into the other parent's home to help get that item. If the child went with her key, if my daughter went with her key, I was allowed to come into the home. There has to be some level of trust for this kind of co-parenting to work. And that's why I say not everybody's meant for co-parenting, by the way.
Right.
So,
and then there's parallel parenting.
That's
right?
what we have to do, is we have to take responsibility for that. Now, as she got older, we really made it her responsibility, but not because of the divorce, but because of her age. You're a 13-year-old. You can remember to have your things where you want them. And, oh, by the way, we'll help you still now because we're your parents, but we wanted to instill that responsibility. And believe me, it was great when she was 16 and driving because she could do it all herself. And by then she was in music and drums and percussion and high school marching band, and there was a lot of stuff, let me tell you.
Yeah, I can imagine. Because at the end of the day, we don't want our kids growing up with a chip on their shoulder that I'm a child of divorce. You want them thinking, well, your daughter's probably an athlete. She's very well-rounded. Mm-hmm. So she identifies herself with whatever her accomplishments are, not that, I'm a child of divorce.
I also want to know what's going on with parents that can't co-parent. Why are there certain parents that are so angry that they can't bring themselves to do this?
I think that's a great question. And, I'll go back to that 10 to 15 to 20% of families, as well as bring up another word that I use, and that's trust. Parents have to be able to recognize, if they're going to co-parent, they have to be able to recognize that they're divorced from their other parent. They have to be okay with that and not have a lot of emotional baggage, if you will, about that, whether it's shame, anger, guilt, whatever, and allow themselves to have their own independent relationships with their children. And like I said, they have to live near enough to one another and respect that the child loves the other parent enough to make that co-parenting work. On the flip side, there are parents, unfortunately, who either because of their own personality issues their substance abuse issues, their long distance with one another, their distrust or dislike of one another, don't seem to be able to get over that very well. And those parents can't co-parent after some time. Now, research will tell us that about 80% of parents will be able to adjust and do some form of cooperative or detached co-parenting. There is a transition time, and I don't expect anybody to do what they can't do. But certainly within that transition time, it's going to be hard to co-parent. And I certainly remember when I got divorced, I mean, it's over 20 years ago now, but when I got divorced, the tensions were a little bit more raw, and there were incidents that occurred that were a little bit more problematic. But within a couple of years, most of that settled down for both my ex-wife and myself. And let's keep in mind one other thing. Usually when you have a separation, you have a leaver and a leavee.
Yeah.
People don't hit that separation, both of them agreeing at the same moment. So the one who's chosen to leave has done some of that work earlier and is more prepared for it. And the one who feels dumped, it takes a little while to get over that. There's no doubt about that. So that first year or two is a transition year. And, you know, my daughter was having a hard time that first couple of years. There's no doubt about it. There's a lot of change going on, and we can expect our children to have some difficulty within that year or two. Hopefully it all settles down. Hopefully people take a deep breath and they can make it work. The ones with significant personality problems, substance abuse, real trust issues, maintain that emotional rawness, if you will, those are the ones who can't co-parent. And then I don't want them to feel like failures if we tell them to co-parent. We've got a better plan for them. It's called parallel parenting. And again, in Parenting After Divorce, I've got some information about the differences between cooperative and parallel parenting. And Steve, I can probably email you a link to a PDF, if you remind me to,
okay,
that you can put up there about the differences between cooperative and parallel parenting.
Great.
And then for those who get involved with the courts and end up in custody assessments or evaluations, called different things in different cultures, you know, I've got in my book, Conducting Child Custody Evaluations from Basic to Complex Issues, I also talk about some of those issues for the evaluator to pay attention to, and ways in which cooperative co-parenting works for some families and what's required for parallel parenting to work for other families.
Well, okay, so if I can be honest here, I am a parallel parent. I do not, we don't, it's sad, but true. We didn't have a great co-parent relationship. So I basically raised my kids on my own. And it would have been nice to have a co-parent to help make major decisions, but that's the way it is. And in terms of, and from all of my research and all the work that I do, I realize that if I want to be a great parent, then I have to just step up the plate, kind of put my life on the shelf a little bit, but I don't believe in being a martyr. And I just did everything I could for my kids all the time. It's hard sometimes being in three places at once, but you kind of adjust. And it made me a stronger person. And I think part of it made my kids good problem solvers, although it wasn't without its difficulties.
Maybe even a little bit more resilient, I might add. I think that one of the fundamental differences between cooperative co-parenting, detached co-parenting, and parallel parenting is really about the amount of communication and the nature of the communication between the parents. We live in a world right now where everybody seems to have joint legal custody, and the need to agree on what our children are going to do, and both parents to be able to make those decisions. And quite frankly, I think that's a wonderful idea, except when it doesn't work.
Yeah,
and it doesn't work with some of these high conflict folks, the people who will not communicate with each other to make decisions. And I talked about seamless lives for kids. This is where sometimes one parent needs to make the decisions, communicate those decisions to the other parent in a successful way, maybe by email, maybe through texting today. You can even, on a parallel parenting thing, you can use Google Calendars. I'm not trying to plug Google, but there's other ways out there where parents can actually both have access to the child's calendar, and they don't have to talk to each other at all.
Great idea.
And it's wonderful with some of this technology for those parents who can't do that. We shouldn't let children's lives... I'll give you an example of a story I heard from a judge in Arizona not too long ago, because we set out to in Arizona to put together a special summit on how to help these high-conflict families. And that's another document I might be able to get for you and put on your link there. But I may not, because right now it's designed for therapists and those of us who work with families, and we're working on one for parents, and maybe when that one's done we can get that to you. But the bottom line is there was a story about this judge encountered this family where it turned out nobody knew it, but this 5-year-old had gotten 2 sets of vaccinations within 2 weeks of one another. Because mom took him to this child to one doctor, and the dad took the child to another doctor, both vaccinated for school. And talk about health risks to our kids. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So parents need to be communicating somehow something about these things. And if they can't, one parent has to be able to make the decisions and do those medical things, do those extracurricular things, whatever it might be, not to exclude the other parent, but to make the child's life safe and sane.
So on that vein then, if we want to make our children's lives safe and sane, and parents are in such a high conflict situation, don't you think there should just be one decision maker on significant issues? Because if they can't talk, if they can't communicate, you would not have that situation where they both get the same where the child gets 2 vaccines.
Well, with those extreme families, you probably will end up with that. I don't think it's a good starting point.
Yeah.
I think the good starting point is the expectation that both parents work together to make decisions on behalf of their children. I think a good starting point is the expectation that parents take that deep breath, learn to put aside their feelings toward one another, and co-parent and raise their children. Okay. I think that as parents show by their behaviors that they can't do that, I think it's important for one consideration to be that one parent makes the decisions. They have to inform the other parent, but not have to wait for the other parent to agree on something to be done for the child. Now, the problem is, what if you have 2 parents who will abuse that power?
Yeah, and?
So what you sometimes do is you might have, in even-numbered years, mom gets to make the decisions, and in odd-numbered years, dad gets to make the decisions. Or you might have mom makes certain decisions that she has demonstrated she can do well, and dad makes other decisions that he's demonstrated he can do well, and they both have to inform the other. And what I want to make my point is that sometimes within the context of these cases, we sometimes think that that both parents are equally obnoxious in their behaviors. And sometimes they are. But I've identified what I call the quote, and this is in one of my research articles I wrote, Attila the Hun doesn't marry Mother Teresa. And what I mean by that is we tend to, and those of us who work in this field, tend to think, both mom and dad are driving everybody nuts. They're both causing all the problems. It's equal, therefore let's find a solution that's equal. And I'll quote my 14-year-old nephew now. Wrong. That's not the case sometimes for some of these families. What we sometimes have is mom or dad driving most of the chaos. When you've got mom or dad driving most of the chaos, the other parent should be the one who gets to be the decision maker, because it's been demonstrated by behavior that that's going to be the plan that works best. On the other hand, when you've got an equal situation, when both parents are creating that chaos, creating those problems, neither one can disengage in a healthy way. That's when we may want to find a situation that keeps both involved, but alternates who gets what decisions when, and maybe all the decisions according to year or something like that.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Oh, there's so much that makes sense. I could speak to you for hours on this, and I think certainly we're going to have another show. But you talked earlier, you mentioned joint physical custody, and there are so many terms that are so confusing for individuals going through divorce. Can you just provide us with a few definitions? Because, when
Sure.
you're sitting in
I'll do my best. And again, the Arizona Guide has definitions in the back of the guide that identifies a lot of different things. But essentially, what I refer to as shared parenting is those situations in which both parents are actively involved in a child's life. Again, it doesn't have to be a 50-50 plan. Week on, week off is a 50-50 plan. The 2-2-5 that I mentioned that my daughter grew up with is a 50-50 plan. By the way, she started that when she was about 9 years old, and continued it all the way through high school. Quick story for you. She went off to college, 2,000 miles away. She calls up, before coming home for the holidays and said, "Dad, what should I do? Should I spend the 2-2-5 with you and Mom when I come back, or whatever?" I said, "Rebecca, you're 18 years old. You can decide whatever you want." By the way, that's what she did. She was so used to that routine, she continued that routine. That kind of shared parenting in some jurisdictions is called shared parenting. In some, it's called joint physical custody. In some, it doesn't have a name at all. But when we talk about physical custody, we're talking about the residence that the child lives in and how much time the child lives in one residence versus the other. Quite frankly, even when one parent has just every other weekend, which is less than your children do with their dad, or every other weekend in one overnight, which is a pretty common plan for a lot of children when it's not a 50-50 plan, they're still sharing parenting. They're still in two residences. And even if I had a neighbor once back when I lived in Michigan, this goes back about 30 years almost, who saw his children once a month on a Sunday afternoon for about 5 hours. And by the way, there were no problems. He was happy with that plan, the mom was happy with that plan, and quite frankly, the kids seemed happy with that plan. I don't know why. As a parent, I wouldn't want to see my children only once a month for several hours, but I get that for some people that works. These children still partly lived in two homes, although by and large they were in their mother's primary custody.
Right.
So primary custody is a term that's used when you have the majority of time in one parent's home. That's different from legal custody, which has to do with the decision-making and those kinds of things that we were just referring to.
Okay, so legal physical custody. No, so what's the decision-making term?
Well, the decision-making is about legal custody.
Legal custody,
so,
okay.
And I wish we would dump the terms custody.
Yeah.
In visitation. I knew a judge once who used to say, visitation is what children do when their parents are in jail. And I think that makes sense. We're parents. We have parenting time. Many states have dumped the language of custody and have moved into the language of parental responsibilities and parenting time and a parenting plan. I think those are much, much clearer terms, cleaner terms, and quite frankly, I think they're more appropriate terms for what we do as parents.
Yeah,
we have
like
our parenting time.
Yeah, like my kids don't visit their dad; they're with their dad.
Another term that's sometimes used is the access to the other parent. But I actually just like parenting time, and this is my parenting time. This is your parenting time.
Yeah, you want to get rid of the war words, as one collaborative lawyer told me.
Now, you got one other problem here. In most states, and I think it's the case in Canada as well, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the percentage of time that we spend with our children creates an effect on the amount of child support a parent gives or receives.
Yeah.
And that causes some parents to fight about parenting time because they want to receive more or give less money. And I understand the thinking of legislators who create that, because if I have my children 75% of the time, it costs more than if I have them half the time. But there's a financial incentive for some parents to try and have more or less time. And it's funny, as a custody evaluator, it's very common for me to hear the allegation made by both parents that the only reason they're fighting over the physical custody, the actual amount of time in each home, is because of the child support issues. And that's an unfortunate byproduct of trying to do things well for children.
Absolutely. You've got so many wonderful things, and I could talk to you for hours, but unfortunately we're going to have to wrap up in a couple of minutes. So are there some top parting thoughts that you could leave with our listeners in terms of parenting?
Sure. Number one, learn to roll with the punches. I'm a hockey fan, and I know you're Canadian, so I grew up in Detroit. So as a Detroiter, I grew up as a hockey fan. And, hockey, the puck bounces. It's unpredictable where that puck is going to bounce. And you've got to be prepared to roll with the punches no matter what happens. So first off, learn to take a deep breath and just recognize that life isn't going to always go the way you think it should go. And that includes what your children might do, and that includes what your ex might do. Secondly is take responsibility for your own behavior. Recognize and pay attention more to your own issues, your own behaviors, much more than the other parents. And third, remember, and I'm paraphrasing what President Clinton said in his 92 campaign, when it's the economy stupid, let's remember, it's the kids. I don't mean to be rude, stupid. It's about the kids. We got to do what's best for our kids. It's not the parents' rights. It's not the best interests of parents. It's about the best interests of children. And we absolutely have to put that at the forefront of everything we do. If parents can do those things, I think we'll have a lot healthier kids growing up.
On that note, I think that we've provided so much valuable information, and you make me want to be an even better parent. I wish I could roll back time and say to my former husband, my co-parent husband, this is what we need to do to really parent our kids more effectively, as they grow older through this divorce process. Because children are the ones that live out the divorce. So thank you, Dr. Stahl, and we'd love to have you back on, because one of the things we didn't get to cover were mobility issues, and I'd love to do that next time.
And that's a topic that mobility or relocation, depending on where you live again. And I think that I certainly appreciate the opportunity, and I'd be happy to come back on again.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I can definitely see that co-parenting is one of the most challenging parts of going through divorce, and Dr. Stahl had some great ideas.
He had some fabulous ideas, and I like what he talked about in terms of co-parenting versus parallel parenting, which is, what I went through. And, parents really have to be cognizant of putting their children's best interest first. And that's what I loved. It's, it's about the kids, stupid. It's not about us. It's about them.
Mm-hmm. So hard, though, for parents to get that through their head when they're in a high conflict divorce, because they just can't get over what this other person did to them or their dislike for them. And so it's so uncomfortable for them to run into their ex that they forget about the kids.
Right. And that's what I love about this show, is that we've got so many experts that we can talk about. And we did a show on forgiveness with Dr. Mark Rye.
Yeah.
So, if there's a parent that's having a hard time forgiving, and I'm not saying forgetting, but it's letting go of the anger, that's something that you have to do so you can be an effective co-parent. Mm-hmm. And if you can't co-parent, and you do parallel parent, as I did and I do, well, but there's lots about letting go. And I don't think about my former husband, I think about my kids, and what's good in their best interest. And the other part is apologizing. And I think that is really important too. Like, how many of us screw up? How many of us make mistakes? And I think it was really nice to hear Dr. Stahl validating that you have to, it's all about role modeling. Nobody's perfect. Although, yes, I know you think I am perfect, but
of course, we all know you.
But we all have our flaws, and there's times where I've screwed up. And I've said something to my kids that I shouldn't have. That I've sort of overstepped, or made them feel comfortable about something about parenting, and so you apologize and you move on.
It's my hope that someone hears this program that maybe is in one of these confrontational relationships. They're trying to think about ways to better co-parent, and that the message from Dr. Stahl actually seeps in, because it's something we all need to get. We just need to get beyond that anger, at least for the minute we're with our kid, as we do these little parent transfers, and just make it work. It's so hard for these kids.
It's so important, and I think that parents right now who are just in the throes of divorce, creating their parenting plan, I think going back to some of the things that Dr. Stahl had to say in terms of what is it that we need to incorporate into the parenting plan. There's so much more, and for sure we'll invite him back because, what are some of the little things that we need to include in the parenting plan so that you are minimizing the conflict and the stress on yourself.
Lots more to talk about. Sorry to our listeners for some of the audio difficulties we were having. Debbie's microphone was kind of going in and out just a little bit. We're on Skype, and that happens, doesn't it, Deborah?
It does.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately. I don't even know that it's happening, but...
Yeah, I heard it, but it was such a good interview. I'm like, I'm not going to stop this. It's not that bad, but, it's Skype, and we apologize. As always, Deborah, thank you so much for another great show on The Smart Divorce.
Thank you. Have a great day.
As always, I hope the program helped you. If you have a comment or question you'd like to ask us, we'd love to hear from you. You can leave us a voicemail on our listener line at area code 248-686-2256. Or drop us an email with your question or comment to divorcesourceradio@gmail.com. New programs are available every week on divorcesourceradio.com, as well as iTunes, BlackBerry, Stitcher, and all over the web. If you'd like to be notified when new programs are available, you can follow us on Twitter. Our follow word is Divorce Source. Also, if you're not listening from our website, I invite you to stop by divorcesourceradio.com, where you'll find a complete program archive. If you're looking for a specific subject, simply type it into our search engine, and chances are you'll find what you're looking for. We also have other resources available at our website as well. And while you're on our website, click on the Facebook icon and join the growing Divorce Source Radio Facebook community. Thanks for listening. Until next time, make it a great week and stay healthy. I'm Steve Peck.